Welcome to the Sunday Bhagavatam program. Like every week, we have a guest speaker this week as well. However, this week we have Kiran Prabhu from our own congregation, who's a very good speaker. He's going to speak about the verses on Vishnu Stuti. Prabhuji joined ISKCON around 9 years ago. Correct me, Prabhuji, that I'm not even sure if that is correct, but I know it's 8 to 9 years ago, but I think it's been 9 years. Prabhuji is a long-term member of the College of Vedic Studies, Leicester. He's also a College of Vedic Studies tutor. I think you'll also teach the Discover courses, Prabhu, if I'm not wrong. And he's on the management team of trustees for the College of Vedic Studies brand. And he's also in the management of ISKCON Leicester. Too many feathers in his cap, really. He's also been working with various other congregations like ISKCON Bhaktivedanta Manor, School of Bhakti. Kiran Prabhu, please correct me if your engagement with them is over or you're still continuing with your projects with them. Kiran Prabhu is an avid reader of the Shastras. And Prabhuji just got married last year. So please bless the couple and please pray for them. So Kiran Prabhu, we look forward to a wonderful class. Thank you for agreeing to take the class. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. My Dandavat pranams to you and all the devotees that have gathered here today. Can everyone all hear me?
Yes, hear you and see you as well.
That's great. But thank you. Thanks to everyone for joining, and also thanks to Kiran Prabhu for inviting me to give this class and for engaging me. I still feel like I'm still actually have lots to learn. I'm still at the play school stage of my own spiritual journey. But I must say that I'm always actually inspired by listening to many of the other speakers that come in on a Sunday. And I thank Santosh Prabhu and Kiran Prabhu for engaging me on this service as well. I'm just going to follow the normal format. So I am first going to begin with the prayers. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jayom Vishnupad Paramahans Parivrajacharya Ashtotra Sada Shri A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahans Parivrajacharya Ashtotra Sada Shri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. ISKCON founder Srila Acharya Sri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Prem se kaho, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityanand, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopa Gopinath Shyam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Madhava ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Shri Mayapur Dham ki jai. Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai. Ganga Mai ki jai. Yamuna Mai ki jai. Tulsi Devi ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Brihad Mridanga ki jai. Samavat Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaura Brahmananda, Hari 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 Bol. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Sri Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So I am just going to go through the verses. So 1.9.37, part of Bhishma Stuti. Svanigamam apahaya mat pratijanigyana ritam adigaltum avaplutta ratastaha rita ratho charano abhayachchaladgur haririva handum ibaham gatot tatariyaha. Svanigamam, own truthfulness. Apahaya, for nullifying. Mat pratigyanam, my own promise. Ritam, factual. Adi, more. Galtum, for doing it. Avaplata, getting down. Rathasta, from the chariot. Taking, Drita, taking up. Rat, chariot. Jarana, wheel. Abhayat, went hurriedly. Jaladgu, trampling the earth. Hari, lion. Iva, like. Hantum, to kill. Ibham, elephant. Gata, leaving aside. Utariha, covering cloth. Translation. Fulfilling my vow and sacrificing his own promise, he got down from the chariot, took up its wheel and ran towards me hurriedly, just as a lion goes to kill an elephant. He even dropped his outer garments on the way. So this is Bhishma Deva speaking and reminiscing. The purport by Bhaktivedanta Srila Prabhupada. The battle of Kurukshetra was fought on military principles, but at the same time in a sporting spirit, like a friend's fight with another friend. Duryodhana criticized Bhishma Dev, alleging that he was reluctant to kill Arjuna because of his paternal affection. A Kshatriya cannot tolerate insults on the principle of fighting. Bhishma Dev therefore promised that the next day he would kill all 5 Pandavas with special weapons made for the purpose. Duryodhana was satisfied and he kept the arrows with him to be delivered the next day during the fight. By tricks, Arjuna took the arrows from Duryodhana and Bhishma Dev could understand that this was a trick of Lord Krishna. So he took a vow the next day that Krishna would have to take up weapons himself, otherwise his friend Arjuna would die. In the next day's fighting, Bhishma Dev fought so violently that both Arjuna and Krishna were in trouble. Arjuna was almost defeated. The situation was so tense that he was about to be killed by Bhishma Dev the very next moment. At that time, Lord Krishna wanted to please his devotee Bhishma by keeping Bhishma's promise, which is more important than his own. Seemingly, he broke his own promise. He promised before the beginning of the battle of Kurukshetra that he would remain without weapons and would not use strength for either of the parties. But to protect Arjuna, he got down from the chariot, took up the rear wheel of the chariot and hurriedly rushed at Bhishma Dev in an angry mood, as a lion goes to kill an elephant. He dropped his cloth, he dropped his covering cloth on the way, and out of great anger, he did not know that he had dropped it. Bhishma Dev at once gave up his weapons and stood to be killed by Krishna, his beloved Lord. The fighting of the day was thus ended at that very moment, and Arjuna was saved. Of course, there was no possibility of Arjuna's death because the Lord himself was on the chariot. But because Bhishma Dev wanted to see Lord Krishna take up some weapon to save his friend, the Lord created the situation, making Arjuna's death appear imminent. He stood before Bhishma Dev to show him that his promise was fulfilled and that he had taken up the wheel. Next verse, Bhagavatam 1.9.38. Shita visika hato vishu nadamsha shataj pari pluta atat ayaniyome prasabham abhisara mat vadahratham sa bhavet bhavatuma bhagwan gatir mukundaha. Shita, sharp, vishika, arrows, hata, wounded by, vishinadamsha, scattered shield, shataja, by wounds, paripluta, smeared with blood, atatyani, the great aggressor, me, my, prasabham, in an angry mood, abhisasara, began to move, mat vada artham, for the purpose of killing me, sa, he, bhavatu, may become, me, my, Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, gati, destination, mukunda, who awards salvation. And the translation, may he, Lord Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who awards salvation, be my ultimate destination. On the battlefield, he charged me as if angry because of the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows. His shield was scattered and his body was smeared with blood due to the wounds. The purport by Srila Prabhupada. The dealings of Lord Krishna and Bhishma Dev on the battlefield of Kurukshetra are interesting because the activities of Lord Sri Krishna appeared to be partial to Arjuna and at enmity with Bhishma Dev. But factually, all this was especially meant to show special favor to Bhishma Dev, a great devotee of the Lord. The outstanding feature of such dealings is that a devotee can please the Lord by playing the part of an enemy. The Lord, being absolute, can accept service from his pure devotee, even in the garb of an enemy. The Supreme Lord cannot have any enemy, nor can a so-called enemy harm him because he is Ajit, or unconquerable. But still he takes pleasure when his pure devotee beats him like an enemy or rebukes him from a superior position, although no one can be superior to the Lord. These are some of the transcendental reciprocatory dealings of the devotee with the Lord. And those who have no information of pure devotional service cannot penetrate into the mystery of such dealings. Bhishma Dev played the part of a valiant warrior, and he purposely pierced the body of the Lord so that to the common eyes, it appeared that the Lord was wounded. But factually, all this was to bewilder the non-devotees. The all-spiritual body cannot be wounded, and a devotee cannot become the enemy of the Lord. Had it been so, Bhishma Dev would not have desired to have the very same Lord as the ultimate destination of his life. Had Bhishma Dev been an enemy of the Lord, Lord Krishna could have annihilated him without even moving. There was no need to come before Bhishma Dev with blood and wounds, but he did so because the warrior devotee wanted to see the transcendental beauty of the Lord, decorated with wounds created by the pure devotee. This is the way of exchanging transcendental rasa, or relations between the Lord and the servitor. By such dealings, both the Lord and the devotee become glorified in their respective positions. The Lord was so angry that Arjuna checked him when he was moving towards Bhishma Dev. But in spite of Arjuna's checking, he proceeded towards Bhishma Dev as a lover goes to a lover, without caring for hindrances. Apparently, his determination was to kill Bhishma Dev, but factually, it was to please him as a great devotee of the Lord. The Lord is undoubtedly the deliverer of all conditioned souls. The impersonalists desire salvation from him, and he always awards them according to their aspiration. But here, Bhishma Dev aspires to see the Lord in his personal feature. All pure devotees aspire for this. And then the third verse, Bhagavatam 1.9.39, the Sanskrit verse. Vijaya Ratta Kutumba Adatote Dritahaya Rashmini Tachtriye Kshaneye Bhagavati Ratirastu Mo Mamursur Yamiha Nirikshaya Hatakata Swarupam. Vijaya Arjuna, Rat, chariot, Kutumbe, the object of protection at all risk, Atadotre, with a whip in the right hand, Dritahaya, controlling the horses, Rashmini, ropes, Datstriya, beautifully standing, Ikshaniya, to look at, Bhagavati, unto the personality of Godhead, Ratiyastu, let my attraction be, Me, my, Mamurso, one who is about to die, Yam, upon whom, Iha, in this world, Nirikshya, by looking, Hataha, those who died, Gataha, attained, Svarupam, original form. And translation, at the moment of death, let my ultimate attraction be to Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. I concentrate my mind upon the chariot driver of Arjuna, who stood with a whip in his right hand and a bridle rope in his left, who was very careful to give protection to Arjuna's chariot by all means. Those who saw him on the battlefield of Kurukshetra attained their original forms after death. And the purport by Srila Prabhupada. A pure devotee of the Lord constantly sees the presence of the Lord within himself because of being transcendently related by loving service. Such a pure devotee cannot forget the Lord for a moment. This is called trance. The mystic yogi tries to concentrate upon the supersoul by controlling the senses from all other engagements, and thus he ultimately attains samadhi. A devotee more easily attains samadhi or trance by constantly remembering the Lord's personal features, along with his holy name, fame, pastimes, etc. Therefore, the concentration of the mystic yogi and that of the devotee are not on the same level. The concentration of the mystic is mechanical, whereas that of the pure devotee is natural and pure love and spontaneous affection. Bhishma Dev was a pure devotee, and as a military marshal, he constantly remembered the battlefield feature of the Lord as Partha Sarathi, the chariot driver of Arjuna. Therefore, the Lord's pastime at Partha Sarathi is also eternal. The pastimes of the Lord, beginning from his birth at the prison house of Gunts, up to the Moshe Lalila at the end, all move one after another in all the universes, just as the clock hand moves from one point to another. And in such pastimes, his associates, like the Pandavas and Bhishma, are constant eternal companions. So Bhishma Dev never forgot the beautiful feature of the Lord as Parthasarathi, which even Arjuna could not see. Arjuna was behind the beautiful Parthasarathi, whilst Bhishma Dev was just in front of the Lord. As far as the military feature of the Lord is concerned, Bhishma Dev observed this with more relish than Arjuna. All the soldiers and persons on the battlefield of Kurukshetra attained their original spiritual form, like the Lord after the death, because by the causeless mercy of the Lord, they were able to see him face to face on that occasion. The conditioned souls rotating in the evolutionary cycle from the aquatics up to the form of Brahma are all in the form of Maya, or in the form obtained by one's own actions and awarded by material nature. The material forms of the conditioned souls are all foreign dresses, and when the conditioned soul becomes liberated from the clutches of material energy, he attains his original form. The impersonalist wants to attain the impersonal Brahman effulgence of the Lord, but that is not at all congenial to the living sparks, parts and parcels of the Lord. Therefore, the impersonalists again fall down and get material forms, which are all false to the spiritual soul. A spiritual form like the Lord's, either two-handed or four-handed, is attained by the devotees of the Lord, either in the Vaikunthas or in the Golok planet, according to the original nature of the soul. This form, which is 100% spiritual, is the Svarup of the original living entity, and all the living entity and all the living beings who participated on the battlefield of Kurukshetra on both sides attained their Svarup, as confirmed by Bhishma Dev. So Lord Shri Krishna was not merciful only to the Pandavas, he was also merciful to the other parties because all of them attained the same result. Bhishmadev wanted the same facility also, and that was his prayer to the Lord. Although his position as an associate of the Lord is assured in all circumstances. The conclusion is that whoever dies looking on the personality of Godhead within or without attains his Svarup, which is the highest perfection of life. Om Gyanti Mirandasya Gyananjana Shlakya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guru Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manabhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Vipakadamayam Tadati Swapudatikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuttapada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Satvaitam Sabudutam Parichana Vitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sahitam Advaitam Savudutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namustate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishavanu Sutidevi Panamami Haripriya Vanjakalpa Turabhyasha Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanabhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasri Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, thank you for all joining, and thanks to Kiran Chaitanya Prabhu for inviting me to give this class today. There's already a lot being said in the purports, and it was really quite hard to see what more I can actually add to, what commentary I can actually add to these verses. I'm in no way qualified to really say much more, but I'm just going to add some anecdotal stuff. I'm just going to be speaking on the strength of Srila Prabhupada and his various commentaries, and dipping in and out of other parts of the Bhagavatam, which I thought was relevant to these verses. But I can see that there's many CD devotees here, so please kindly bless me so that I can share something useful with you. And yeah, please engage with me. Any comments, any questions, anything that I have missed at the end, please tell me if I've done that or if I've misrepresented anything. I just want to, just briefly, maybe remind myself about the glories of the Bhagavatam. So, within Sanatana Dharma, there are 6 schools of Vedic philosophy, which all give different views about the original source of creation. And those 6 schools are like the 6 darshanas, or different angles of vision. And they were developed by different sages who saw different stages of creation. And 2 of the schools, which are, I think, Nyaya and Vaisheshika, are about the philosophy on logic. They maintain that the cause of creation are atoms and combination of atoms. And then you've got Samkhya philosophy, which is the philosophy of analytical study. And that philosophy says that actually it is material nature that is the cause of creation. And then you've got Purvamimsa, which says that actually it is karma that is the cause of creation through actions and reactions perpetually. Then you got, Patanjali's yoga, which says that actually universal consciousness is the cause of creation. And so all of these sages that developed these philosophies were either disciples of Vyasadeva or his own contemporaries. But Vyasadeva, after studying all of these different darshanas, he completely summarized them and, refuted some of them in his Vedanta Sutra, presented the complete end conclusion of all the schools, where he stated that that it is actually the supreme absolute truth that is the cause of all causes. But because Vedanta philosophy and various other scriptures were still ambiguous, he finally compiled his final masterpiece, which was the Srimad Bhagavatam, wherein there he firmly establishes that the cause of all causes is none other than Vasudeva, and that he is the ultimate object of all spiritual practice. And so in this Bhishma Stuti, Bhishmadev himself, one of the great Mahajans, he himself echoes this message. And so therefore, we are really, really fortunate that this Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the essence of all Vedanta, and which harmonizes all the other 5 or 6 schools, is available to us because of Srila Prabhupada. So all glory to Srila Prabhupada, and I take his blessings. Now these 3 verses, oh my God, they are truly, truly amazing. There's so much actually written here by Prabhupada. Now here Bhishma Dev continues to reminisce and meditate on the exchanges that he had with Krishna. He's actually relishing not only his own relationship with Sri Krishna, but also that of Arjuna's. And then later, he actually also relishes the relationship he relishes the relationship between the gopis and Krishna. But I'm not going to talk about the gopis because that will be covered, I think, next week. So Bhishma Dev, even whilst on his deathbed, he is actually relishing, what is the best thing in life, which is Harikatha. And the overarching lesson from these 3 verses is that that we should actually raise our consciousness and make permanent impressions on our own consciousness and sanskaras, so that during times of challenges, difficulty, and more importantly, death, we can also fix our mind on Krishna's pastimes in the same way Bhishma Dev did. And so Bhishma Dev is actually a great example of leaving one's body in a Krishna consciousness way. The Bhagavatam elsewhere says that the ultimate goal of life is Ande Narayan Smriti, which means to think of Narayan at the time of death. And so Bhishma Dev is actually exemplifying this in these 3 verses, when he's just reminiscing. And so, from these verses and purport, we've given a few insights, and I put them into 3 categories. And so one theme was the nature of the Supreme Lord. The other theme was Bhishma Dev's own mood. And then the third theme that stood out to me was the purpose of yoga. Now, the first theme, which is, there's some context I want to give behind these verses. So Bhishma Dev here is talking about how Krishna broke his own promise and fulfilled Bhishma's own vow. Now, there is some very interesting context behind this. And so some days ago, whilst the war was still actually going on, in the war camp one evening, or I think in the daytime, Duryodhana had ruffled Bhishma Dev's feathers, saying that Bhishma Dev, you're no warrior, you're just like a namesake Senapati, and in your heart is actually with the other side. And he just accused Bhishma Dev of not doing a good job, and just being impartial, being partial to the Pandavas. And this actually infuriated Bhishma Dev, who then vowed to kill all the Pandavas. And so what Bhishma Dev did was he actually took 5 arrows and he chanted some mantras, and he told Duryodhana that I have now put my life force and powers into these 5 arrows. And with these 5 arrows, I will kill all the Pandavas tomorrow. Now Duryodhana was rejoicing, and he was all excited, thinking that, right, when Bhishma Dev makes a vow, he will actually now, completely kill them. But then at the same time, he was still skeptical because he knew that Bhishma Dev had a soft spot for the Pandavas. So what he did was he thought to himself that actually, I'm going to keep these vows just in case Bhishma Dev goes a bit soft-hearted and, gives the arrows away. So now Krishna, being the Supreme Lord, knew about this. So that same evening, he actually encouraged Arjuna to go and visit the camp of Duryodhana and claim this boon that Duryodhana actually owed to Arjuna from a long time ago. And so here's a flashback for you. So, a long time ago, when the Pandavas were actually in exile for 14 years, Arjuna once actually saved Duryodhana's life from the hands of these Gandharvas. Duryodhana had committed an offense by trying to capture this really attractive Gandharva woman. But because, what happened was that Duryodhana basically got defeated by these Gandharvas. He was held captive. And then what happened was that Arjuna actually rescued Duryodhana from the Gandharvas. And because of this, Duryodhana then offered a boon. And Arjuna said, actually, I will take this boon one day later on in life. And so now Krishna had instructed Arjuna to just go to the camp and, just take this boon. And so Arjuna went to the camp, and Duryodhana actually asked, so, why have you now come to meet me? Arjuna replied, I've now come to ask for the boon that you had once promised me. He pointed to the 5 arrows and said, right, Duryodhana, I want these arrows. Now Duryodhana was speechless and his heart was absolutely shattered. And it was just like checkmate, like in a game of chess. It was just quite funny. And then, because Duryodhana was a Kshatriya, because Duryodhana was a Kshatriya, he had, once been saved, he had from a sort of from a warrior moral perspective, he had to honor this boon. And so now later, when Bhishma Dev came to find out what Krishna, had actually done, he realized that this was Krishna's tricks. So Bhishma Dev thought, oh, wow, really? So this is how you want to play. And so Bhishma Dev thought that, right, because Krishna has made me break my vow, as I had invested all this special potency in these arrows from all night tapasya for many years, all of that has now gone and taken away from me. And this is because of Krishna. So Bhishma Dev took another vow on the spot. And he said that right now, I vow that I am now going to make Krishna break his own vow, or otherwise Arjuna will be dead. And so, with that valor and determination, Bhishma Dev came to the battlefield. And now there was a fierce fight between Bhishma Dev and Arjuna. And everybody was just watching as well, thinking what's going to happen. But the thing is that at the esoteric relationship level, between Bhishma and Krishna, this was nothing but an exchange of divine rasa. They were both just relishing this exchange of chivalrous rasa. And so, at one point, it became so bad that Arjuna became helpless. And it is actually said that when Bhishma was releasing, his fierce arrows, Krishna would sometimes get up and actually, take the arrows in his own body himself just to protect Arjuna. And then, when that would happen, Bhishma Dev would get all excited and then, release more arrows. But the reality was that this was nothing but a divine exchange between the Lord and his devotee. At one point, Arjuna became so helpless that he was going to be killed by Bhishma Dev. And so, because Krishna could no longer tolerate, he just got down from his chariot, in a fit of anger, picked up this, massive chariot wheel and started marching towards Bhishma Dev to kill him. Arjuna saw this and, ran towards Krishna, from behind and grabbed his thighs to stop him. And then in the meanwhile, Bhishma Dev finally laid down his weapons, and just smiled. And he was now satisfied because Krishna had broken his vow, just as he desired. And, he did this to save his own devotee Arjuna. And this is what Bhishma Dev actually wanted. So, Bhishma he was just relishing this chivalrous pastime. And because it had touched his heart so much. And he remembered all the details, how, Krishna had dropped his garment. And so, the funny thing is that, Krishna being the Supreme Lord wasn't going to attack Bhishma Dev in a very dry way. But, this was in a very rustic kind of way, in a very rustic mellow. And so the theme that stands out here, or one of the themes that stand out here, is that when we love someone, we are prepared to be defeated by them and made look inferior as well. And so here the Lord just relishes these exchanges. And, the thing is that nothing can bound the Lord. There is no promise or vow that can bound the Lord. And there is no rope that can bound the Lord, that can bound the Lord, as we know. And the only thing that can actually bound the Lord is the love and devotion of his devotee, and hence why Krishna broke his own vow to please his own devotee, Bhishma. And as Damodar in his childhood, he relished being chased and bound up by Mother Yashoda. And on the battlefield, he just enjoyed this chivalrous rasa with Bhishma Dev. Now, this whole pastime and exchange, within these 3 verses also gives us some deep insight into the nature of the Supreme Lord, especially when you compare it to some of his own, some of his other avatars. So Bhishma Dev, describes how Krishna is willing to sacrifice his own vow and, help, Bhishma, and help fulfill Bhishma by compelling Krishna to fight. And so, this is just chivalrous rasa. Now, the breaking of Krishna's vow is actually quite sweet, I thought, and it's also a really great contrast against some of his own other incarnations. Now, when the Supreme Lord appears in his various avatars, although he's unlimited, he doesn't display all of his rasas all the time, and he doesn't always display his fullest transcendental qualities. And, an example of this is Sri Ram. And, Lord Ram, he was Maryada Purushottam. And when he appeared, he always abided with Dharma. He abided by the codes of ethics, morality. He never cheated. He never lied. He never ran away from the battlefield, and he never broke any promises. But here, the same Supreme Lord as Krishna is actually willing to drop his own vow at the drop of a hat, just to please his own devotee and to relish this chivalrous rasa or heroic exchange. And as Prabhupada says that, he didn't have to break his vow. With his own Maya, he could have just defeated Bhishma, but to fulfill the desire of his own devotee, the Lord just appeared to be compelled, just like an ordinary man, and he just broke his own vow to glorify Bhishma Dev even further. But the funny thing is that, on the other hand, the same Lord Krishna, who was the killer of many demons in his childhood, once upon a time, he fled the battlefield, actually, when he was faced with Galyavan. And there he became known as Ranchod. But on the other hand, you can't actually imagine Sri Ram or Purushottam fleeing the battlefield. So, it's quite amusing, really, the way the Lord's pastimes are. Another one is with Sri Ram, he could not be the recipient of Madhurya Rasa or conjugal love. Whereas with Krishna, he was the recipient of all types of rasas and exchanges. So, Krishna himself is described as Rasaraj, or he is the Lord of all rasas. And a devotee can have any type of exchange or relationship with him, which you may not find in some of the other Vishnu forms. And so, with Lord Ram, for example, he appeared to be dependent on the Vanaras, but this was his Leela and his Rasa as Dasya Rasa. Because with Sri Ram, for example, one cannot approach him directly as he's emperor. One can be a servant of Sri Ram, as exemplified by Lakshman, for example. But with Sri Krishna, for example, one can be a servant in the mood of Dasarasa, when he is Dwarkadish. One can be a friend of Sri Krishna, or a parent, or a lover, and so on. So what this means is that, Krishna's position is actually unique. Because he is the original Vishnu himself, he is the source of all rasas. He is Rasaraj. And one can have a variety of exchanges with him, which you may not find in some of the other Vishnu forms. So, Krishna is Leela Purushottam, so he sometimes exhibits, qualities which are actually contradictory. So, 1 minute he's fleeing the battlefields, just like a coward, and he's called Ranchod. And then another minute he's breaking his vow, appearing to want to kill the greatest warrior on earth. And, he's just Leela Purushottam. In these verses, Bhishma Dev mentions how Krishna was covered in wounds and blood, and how he charged at him like an angry elephant. Now, Bhishma here is actually glorifying, Krishna here in his personal form. Now, this kind of chivalrous exchange is actually best explained in another pastime, which appears, I think, in Canto 3 of the Bhagavatam. So in Canto 3, you've got the pastime of Vara Avatar, who, where the Supreme Lord in that Vara Avatar actually engaged in a battle with Hiranyaksh. Now, Hiranyaksh and Vara Avatar, in this pastime, they were actually engaged in a big battle. Now, the demigods were actually really petrified. And it also appeared that Lord Vishnu as a Varatar was about to lose. But interestingly, the Srimad Bhagavatam says that the blows that the Lord was receiving was actually nothing more than an elephant struck by flowers. And Prabhupada, in his commentary, in that pastime, actually says that the Lord actually, enjoyed the striking on his transcendental body, just like how a fully grown father fights with his small child. So, sometimes a father enjoys play fighting with a small child. And so similarly, the Lord felt Hiranyaksha is striking on his body to be just like flowers offered for worship. So, the Lord just himself, decided to fight in order to enjoy that transcendental bliss, that rasa. And he enjoys that attack sometimes. So, so therefore, we can apply that learning here in this pastime as well with Bhishmadev. So, when Krishna was being wounded by Bhishmadev, we can understand that to Krishna, this was just like a play fight, like father and son. And Bhishmadev, being a Mahajan, actually understood this was just nothing more than a divine exchange between Bhakt and Bhagwan. And so here, hence, for that reason, Bhishmadev actually desires that same Supreme Lord as the object of meditation at the time of death. The other thing is that, as Srila Prabhupada says, that Krishna and Bhishma appear to be enemies, but the fact is that the Lord has no enemies, and this is also the nature of the Supreme Lord as well. But sometimes the Lord just wants to enjoy this chivalrous rasa, and sometimes, hence for that reason, he gets his own devotees to play the part of an enemy sometimes. And that becomes another way of serving him. And that's just quite amusing and astonishing, really. And, because the Lord is absolute, he can accept service from his devotee, even in the garb of an enemy itself as well. And he has done this many, many times, especially with Jay and Vijay. And as we may know, that Jay and Vijay were cursed by the four Kumaras. And Vishnu himself, sanctioned this arrangement. And now his own devotees were to play the role of his own enemies. Again, this is nothing more than a leela or transcendental pastime of the Lord, because he has no enemies. And, a devotee at the same time is also ever ready to serve as an instrument in the hands of the Lord, and even as an enemy if required. So Jay and Vijay accepting the service of playing the role of his enemies, they actually accepted this role simply so that they could return back to Vaikuntha as soon as possible, and that was their concession. Another interesting, another example of this sort of arrangement where the devotee plays the role of an enemy is actually from the Ramayan, which I also found fascinating. Another service which is less glorious. So, in the Valmiki Ramayan Balakand section, Lord Vishnu asks the demigods to assist him in his pastime when he appears as Lord Ram. And, where you've got Mandra, as we know, contaminated the mind of Keikei. And for that reason, Lord Ram is banished. Now, the Padma Puran reveals that Mandra was none other than a Gandharva who was actually asked by the demigods, by Brahma, to appear as a hunchback woman and become the instrument to really banish Lord Ram. So she was, a Gandharva, and she was asked to have this ungrateful, service. And so, the devotees of the Lord are willing to take on any service, even if it's less glorious. And so Prabhupada says that these are just some of the transcendental reciprocity, dealings of the devotees with the Lord. And those who have no understanding of, pure devotional service just cannot understand this. And so in these dealings, both the Lord and the devotees sometimes become glorified in their respective positions. So, the question to ask, ourselves is, are we actually willing to serve the Lord in any way, any way we want? Sometimes we find that in our own services, we want to serve in a way that just pleases us or in a way that is convenient to us. But the Lord sometimes may want his own devotees to even sometimes just become his own enemy. And so, with Bhishmadev, he was actually compelled to fight on the side opposite Krishna and Arjuna, and he just accepted that. And he just accepted that he will fight against the Lord. So, what this shows is that devotional service is not always about doing what makes us happy with the sole aim of going back to Golok. Devotional service is also about taking on inconveniences to please the Lord and serve him in any way that the Lord desires. And another great example that I find personally inspiring is, Sri Hanuman, who was asked by Lord Ram to stay on the earth until the end of the Kali Yuga as a service to him. So that was the nature of the Supreme Lord. So some of my key takeaways. And then the other theme was really about the mood of Bhishmadev. There's a wonderful insight here as well. So the mood of Bhishmadev, as we can see, is just really, really extraordinary, really, really wonderful. And, as he is one of the great authorities, he's one of the greatest authorities because he is one of the Mahajans. Bhishmadev actually learned all the Vedas and their branches from Vashisht. And Vashisht was the same sage that also taught Lord Ram. Now, Bhishma Stuti is described in this chapter that we've covered over the last few weeks, so 1.9. But, this same conversation is actually described in more detail in the Shanti Parva section of the Mahabharata, which is book 12. And it ends in the Anususan Parva section of the Mahabharata. Now, in the Mahabharata, when Bhishmadev explains in detail about Raj Dharma, about Varnashram Dharma, and about morality, etc., Yudhishthira, ends the conversation by asking some final and vitally important questions. Now, the conversation between Yudhishthira and Bhishmadev ends with Yudhishthira asking some, really wonderful, profound questions at the end, which are not found in the Bhagavatam. And Yudhishthira says, Kimakam Devatam Loke Kim Vyapakam Parayanam. So Yudhishthira asks the question, so who may be said to be the one God in the world? Who is our sole refuge? Who should one actually worship? What is the foremost of all dharmas and religion in your judgment, Bhishmadev? And, what is the mantra that can free us from repeated birth and death? So these are the questions that Yudhishthira asks after talking about, Raj Dharma. And in response, Bhishmadev recites the 1,000 names of Vishnu, which is the Vishnu Sahasranam. So Bhishmadev responds, in his response, declares that it is none other than Vasudev who is the Lord of all lords. Bhishmadev says that Vasudev is the highest refuge, the highest penance. He is the highest, Supreme himself. And as we know in other parts of the Bhagavatam, it says Vasudev Paraveda, Vasudev Yaragyanam, etc. So Bhishmadev, in response to Yudhishthira's question, Bhishmadev says that Vasudeva Krishna, he is the master of speech. His vision extends, absolutely everywhere. He sets the cycle of the yugas continuously because he is time himself. So, Bhishmadev advises Yudhishthira that, whether one is a Brahmana, a Kshatriya, or Vaishya or Shudra, one should certainly chant the holy names of Vishnu. And so therefore he really, chants the 1,000 names of Vishnu in response to this question. And so, this is the direction that Bhishmadev gives to Yudhishthira in the Anususan Parva section of the Mahabharata. Now, and then moving on, we've also got something about, Bhishmadev also really describes the end purpose of yoga in this final verse, 1.9.39. Now, Bhishmadev describes the high samadhi, which is meditation on Krishna, on his personal form. Now, in this day and age, we have many spiritual practices. In this day and age, when someone passes away, they are often left thinking about their own family, their own estate, their wealth, what's going to happen to, what's going to happen to my son, what's going to happen to my grandkids, what's going to happen to my wife, etc. This is what people tend to think about at the time of death. And in the Bhagavatam, this is what Puranjana was thinking about. And when Puranjana became very much attached to family life, etc., he thought about his wife at the time of death, and then he came back, in a body of a woman. And this is what the Bhagavatam says, whatever you think of at the time of death, you take on that form. But here at the time of death, Bhishmadev, although he had lots and lots of grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and, he wasn't thinking about, what's going to happen to everyone now. In fact, at the time of death, Bhishmadev didn't want to think about anything other than Krishna's personal form. And this is a big valuable lesson to all of us. And not only Bhishmadev, but even Parikshit Maharaj, sets this example. When Parikshit Maharaj found out he was going to die, he wasn't thinking, oh, what's going to happen about my children. He just took the opportunity to really just listen to Harikatha in the last 7 days. And so Bhishmadev, he was the knower of all Vedas and all their ancillary, Vedic texts. And, it is also another fact that, many followers of Sanatana Dharma, they try to attain the impersonal Brahman. And they often follow the path of Gyan or Dhyan Yoga. And what they do is, through that spiritual practice, they try to understand the true, nature by a process of non-identification. And so they follow the process of neti neti. They say, not this, meaning that I am not this body, I am not this mind, I am not the false ego. And so by this process of self-introspection, by this process of non-identification, they finally arrive at the soul or the self. And then, through that process of Gyan and Dhyan, they become established in the self and realizing that they are Brahman spirit. But the thing is that self-realization alone through Gyan or Dhyan is not the purpose of Vedas. The purpose of yoga, the purpose of all spiritual practice, the purpose of all Gyan is actually to know the Supreme Being and meditate on him and, surrender unto him. And this is exactly what Bhishmadev Mahajana is doing at the time of death, who is a great authority figure. And so Bhishmadev, as you can see, he's not there just lying there meditating on the impersonal Brahman. He's meditating on the personal form of the Lord. So, we should really follow in his footsteps. And, from a philosophical Vedanta perspective as well, the Upanishads themselves, they state that the Supreme Self cannot be attained through Gyan, through austerities, etc. Gatha and Mundaka Upanishad says, Niyatma pravachena labhyona medaya. And Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says exactly the same, that my form cannot be seen through Gyan, through austerities, etc. So if one cannot pursue, cannot follow the process of Gyan and self-introspection, what is the answer? And Krishna says, only by devotion can one see my personal form. And so, because Bhishmadev had the greatest devotion for Krishna, he actually got to see him at the final stage of his life. And that's the key takeaway for us. We need devotion to see the personal form of the Lord. And so to see Krishna in his personal form, it just means that we need to practice devotion. And by doing so, that is the only way we can, attract divine grace. We can't attract divine grace through Gyan or Dhyan. And so it is through divine grace that Bhishma Dev himself got to see Krishna at the time of his death. And, being the knower of all the Vedas, he meditated on Krishna in his personal form. And as we can see, he didn't meditate on anything impersonal. So in this verse, the conclusion is that those who saw the personal form of the Supreme Lord in the battlefield of, Kurukshetra, they also attained their original spiritual form after death. So, that also means that although Krishna had, wounds, he was covered in blood, that was just his Leela. This was not a personal form, it was a spiritual form. How can a material form give us liberation? So by meditating on Krishna, one attains this original Svarup. And so this also, proves that the Lord's form is also actually spiritual. So, what's the conclusion and what does all of this actually mean for us? So I'm just going to conclude now. The big takeaway from all of this that I found was that, the living entity, Yonaya Jivatma, the living entity itself is actually yearning for rasa. And our desire for love in our many, many relationships that we have, especially leading up to the time of death, is actually nothing but a spiritual craving. But we don't realize that the best relationship that one can have is with Krishna. So, the living entity, we as Jivatma, we're actually yearning for rasa. And Krishna himself is Rasaraj. And Harinam is actually the method, as Bhishma Dev actually says in the Mahabharata itself. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself demonstrated this Yug Dharma 500 years ago. So in the Mahabharata, Bhishma Dev advised Yudhishthira to chant the names of Vishnu. And this is exactly what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself demonstrated. And, when it comes to the chanting of the holy name, it's not only a practice for the Vaishnavas or for the followers of Sanatana Dharma. Factually speaking, some of the other major religions of the world also make a point of, chanting the name. So, when you look at the Bible, the book of Romans actually says that glorify the holy name of the Lord, and you will be saved. Love thy Lord with all thy heart, with all thy mind. That's what the Bible says. And then you've got the book of Hadith, the Quran, which says that Allah has 99 names. Just say his names. And then you've got the Guru Granth Sahib also, which says that one should chant the holy name of the Lord not once, but thousands and thousands of times. So, this shows that this is the spiritual practice recommended in all the major religions of the world for the Kali Yuga. And, this is not by chance. And, this was Bhishma Dev's own answer to Yudhishthira's question as to how can one become freed from, birth and death, and how to think of him at the time of death. So therefore, to follow the footsteps of Bhishma Dev and think of Krishna at the time of death, we also need to leave, deep, deep impressions on our consciousness, right now and not later. And so what that means is that we also need to take our sadhana quite seriously, because Garud Puran says that when a person dies, they could potentially feel the unbearable pain of about 40,000 scorpions. And so if we fix our minds on Krishna regularly, and if we fix our minds on Krishna regularly through our sadhana, Krishna says there's some aham samudra mrityu samsara sagat bhavani, which means he then ultimately becomes our swift deliverer from repeated birth and death, as he did with Bhishma Dev. And so, like Bhishma, we should also develop and relish our own relationship with Krishna, because it will also help transcend pain, especially at the time of death. So, we must remember that although the Lord is not present in his original form at this point in time, what we can do is, connect with his various leelas through the Srimad Bhagavatam and through his holy name, because they are non-different to him. So we can, relish his holy name and Harikatha regularly. And by doing that, we can also leave deep, deep impressions on our consciousness. and follow the footsteps of Bhishma Dev, so that we can also focus our own dhyan on Krishna at the time of death. And if we do this, one can easily remember Krishna at the time of death, and also escape the clutches of life and Maya, Ante Narayan Smriti. This is where I'm going to end. I think I've rambled on quite a bit now, but I really welcome any thoughts, questions, anything that I have missed. Please unmute yourself. I am just seeing comments. So so this is from Mani Prabhu. Really appreciate an amazing spiritual point you made earlier in the class, that if we love someone, we are ready to be defeated by them. We're a glorious way of expressing love, and can be practiced moment by moment. Oh, thank you, Prabhu, for sharing that. Yeah, that is Krishna. Any thoughts, reflections by anyone? There's many senior devotees here. I really welcome any feedback, criticisms. This was really quite a long purport as well. And I've just tried to join up the dots, but I welcome any thoughts, questions, comments.
Kiran Prabhu, thank you for such a wonderful class. Yes, really enjoyed it, hearing from you. Look forward to hear the next one.
Thank you, Prabhu, for your kind words and your encouragement always. Pradeep Prabhu asks questions, so thank you for your class. And if you think of Krishna with whip in hand and bridal robe, do we go to Golok? Is there Kurukshetra planet? That's a very interesting question, Prabhu. You put me on the spot here. So, from what I've heard and read over the years, so Krishna's role as Parthasarathi, that mood is actually the role of, he's Dwarkadish actually. He's a prince playing the role of, that role is really more akin to Dwarkadish. So, when he is a charioteer, he is not the Krishna of Golok. He is not a Gopa. So therefore, it's a completely different rasa altogether. And so he's Dwarkadish playing the role of a friend on a chariot, but he is also a Yaduvansh. So therefore, I've not actually, seen any commentary on that. But if I was a betting man, I would say that one probably attains not Golok, but probably Dwarkadish. I've not read that there is a Kurukshetra planet, but I think one would probably go to Dwarkadish, because Parthasarathi is really probably fits under Dwarkadish, I think. But I welcome any other comments that other devotees may have, or any other insight others may have as well on that one. I would say Dwarkadish, really. Dwarka is okay for Gujaratis, yes. Rinal and Mataji, thank you very much. It's great how you found so much to expand on after saying how much. Trying to take some tips from you about thinking wider. Oh, thank you, Mataji. I've just plagiarized from others and other parts of the Bhagavatam. There was nothing new here, and many others will already know everything, to be honest. Any other thoughts, comments from anyone? If there's no other comments, then you can have your Sunday back. Actually, there's another comment. Would there be an element of how we are feeling about the Lord at the time of death? Wow, this is actually a really big question. It really depends. Because under the Bhakti school, the process of Bhakti is that one practices the sadhana Bhakti, which may be mechanical, but over due course of time through our spiritual practice, one eventually realizes what their svarup is, what their constitutional relationship is with Krishna. And so therefore is an element of how you're feeling about the Lord at the time of death. So if one succeeds in their sadhana and bhakti, then by the time they get to the time of death, one may come to the realization as to what their svarup is, if they're really fortunate. Or if one doesn't, quite get there, then, Krishna may just, he may just preserve what you lack, and where you may just continue from where you left off. So it's a win-win situation, but where you end up at the time of death is really how well you're committed in your sadhana in this life, and that cultivation will really bring realizations through the course of your life. So, this is part of self-realization and God realization. Every devotee will have a different feeling. Yeah, we'll have a different feeling. That's what I've read based on commentaries. But thank you for such a wonderful question, Sarita Mataji. Any other final questions, reflections, thoughts? Thank you all so much for joining and for the really wonderful questions. And thank you, Karuna, Chaitanya Prabhu, and Santosh Prabhu for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to really immerse myself in the Bhagavatam. And I'm really grateful for this kind of opportunity, and for it's always a privilege and honor to be able to serve in any in this way. And I look forward to hearing from many others around me as well in the just on a regular basis. Hare Krishna all, and I shall see you all soon.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you very much again for the class.
Hare Krishna, Kiran Prabhu. Thanks a lot. Beautiful class, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for the wonderful class.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for the lovely class.
Hare Krishna, thank you for the wonderful.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Prabhu.